I thought that I would do a brief lecture, very short, on some of the earliest cities that we know of. I'm going to do another video on currently known ancient scripts that are undeciphered. Also, some of the historical discoveries of 2022 that concerning ancient history, and then different from my readings in archaeology, I'll go over the archaeological discoveries of 2021, 2022, and 2023. I'll go over 20 discoveries made in each year, 20 in 2021, 20 in 2022, and 20 in 2023. The archaeology reading was published in 2018, so these are discoveries that were made after the publication of Dr. Chazan's book. And then I'm going to go over some of the oldest books in the world. Again, not the earliest books that we know of that at one time did exist but no longer exist. So we're going to go over the oldest books in the world that at current still exist. Again, there's a difference between the oldest and the earliest. And so when we're talking about the earliest cities of humans, these are the earliest cities that we know of before the year 3000. Again, this was over 6,000 years ago. And indeed, there have been many cities that have evolved over the time span of human existence. But most of the earliest cities that we have discovered in history and archaeology, in fact, no longer exist. The oldest cities, however, still exist down to our present time. And so, indeed, the earliest cities that we know of, indeed, we know that those cities still exist. The oldest cities do not exist. The oldest cities still exist. Again, like the oldest books still exist today. However, the earliest books are no longer existing, but we do know of several of them through archaeology and through historical studies. The earliest cities and the earliest books are those that we know of that indeed do not exist anymore. But we do know of them through the disciplines of archaeology and indeed history as well. And so, again, historians have defined what the word city and or urban society means by means of well-defined characteristics. Archaeologists have also sought such a definition. As has been mentioned, Gordon Child's paper called The Urban Revolution was written in the year 1950, so right in the middle of the 20th century, right after World War II, but right during the start of the Korean War. And in that paper, Gordon Child was a famous archaeologist, known as one of the leading founders and pioneers of the discipline of archaeology. In that paper, he espoused 10 traits that are deducible from the evidence of archaeological data. Today, his model still stands remarkably well in the sense that his criteria, for the most part, has still been recognized as indicative of the key developments concerning the rise of early complexified societies. And so Gordon Child had 10 towering traits that characterize a city. And again, some ancient societies had some of these traits and characteristics. However, most historians say that if they do not have at least 8 of these traits, then they are not necessarily categorized as cities. And so the first trait is the size and the population density. This is distinctly what constitutes a city versus that of a village or that of a town. The size has to be at least 20 hectares, which is about 50 acres or more. And then the population has to be at least greater than 10,000 in population. So first we have the size and population density. It has to be at least 20 hectares or 50 acres in size, and has to have a population greater than 10,000 in its density. The second trait would be that it has to have complex division of labor. We're seeing that no longer are people just making things and selling them for their own private interest. We're seeing a complex division of labor throughout. We're seeing also that there are shops where these things are sold, and so it's more broad and less specific in the fact that it has a not just labor, but a division of labor. The third is that there is a production of surplus by the commoners in order to pay for government. And so there's a surplus collected mostly by the leaders in order to pay for governmental things. The fourth is that there's the formation of social classes. Usually there's a social hierarchy where there's a lot of people with wealth at the top, people poor at the bottom, and some kind of middle class, but there's something that distinguishes one class from another class. And of course we have those as primates. We've had those social classes that have existed throughout the animal world of primates, including ourselves. And then there's the centralization of power. This is very questionable. This is debatable. Is there a political hierarchy? Obviously, some people believe that you can have a state without any sort of centralization of power. You could, for example, have a state that is equally distributed, a state in which there is no centralization of power, but this is highly questionable. And so there may be, you might be able to characterize a city that has no centralization of power, but most historians have agreed that there is some kind of political hierarchy, and indeed that political hierarchies existed in the human lifespan, even before the time of language and the invention of language, and there was political hierarchy. But however, there was no centralization of power in a governmental sense. Then you have monumental architecture, symbolic structures that convey messages. You look at modern cities today; it could be anything from buildings or anything from monuments that are symbolic, or that they convey a message to the people or the population. There is a bureaucracy. Originally, Gordon Childe had just characterized this as a writing, some kind of writing system that is used. But most historians today just say that at least if the city has some formal record keeping, that just stands for bureaucracy. Then we have the regular foreign trade. It has to be long-distance trade, a trade that it's just not trade between individuals. It's a kind of trade that's set up that is overseeing long distances with other foreigners outside of the city itself. And then there are two other characteristics or traits that Gordon Childe had talked about, but nevertheless, historians have agreed somewhat that these are not necessarily indicative of a city. There can be cities without these things. One would be the developmental practical sciences, a developed practical science, for example, mathematics, geometry, and astronomy. There were cities that did not have these things. And so therefore you can have cities without a developed practical science. You can have a city without mathematical things, geometrical things, astronomical things. And then there's the conceptualized artwork. A city does not necessarily need to have conceptualized artwork in order to be a city. And so we've learned today that in order to be a city characterized as a city, the population has to be at least 20 hectares or 50 acres or more. The population has to be 10,000 or more. And there's a debate as to what size this needs to be. Some think it needs to be larger in size or larger in population. There needs to be a complex division of labor that is indicated, a production of surplus by the commoners in order to pay for government, the formation of the social classes in some form or another, a centralization of power, monumental architecture, a bureaucracy or some form of record keeping, and the regular foreign trade, long distance trade as well. And so one of our earliest cities that we know of is in the Jordan Valley, about 10 kilometers north of the Dead Sea. Its name is Jericho. It existed way before the time that it was mentioned in the biblical text. It existed thousands and thousands of years before that, but it became a city around 3000 BCE. Then we have a city called Susa, which came into existence with these characteristics around 3100 BCE. And that Susa is located in Iran. It is between the lower Mesopotamian plains and the Zagros Mountains. Susa had all of these characteristics as well, and like Jericho, had existed before these characteristics had been developed. Then we have Nekhen, which is Upper Egypt, as known for people who aren't familiar with geography. Upper Egypt is the southern part of Egypt. It's also known in the Greek, Nekhen, as Hierakonpolis, and it's about 2 kilometers west of the River Nile. It became a city around 3300 BCE. And so again, we have Jericho at 3000, Susa at 3100, and then Nekhen, or Hierakonpolis, and that is 3300 BCE. Another ancient city is called Uruk, or Uruk. Mentioned, you might briefly remember the Epic of Gilgamesh. This is where this would have came from. It became a city around 3700 BCE, and it is located in southern Mesopotamia, also now known as Warcha in Iraq. And then we have another city called Brak. It is dated to around 3800 BCE. There was no evidence of writing in Brak, however. It is located in northeastern Syria, near the modern village of Tel Brak. And so, as you can see, historians and archaeologists have come to terms with defining what characterizes or constitutes a city as distinct from a town or a village. So, I hope that you have learned a little thing about how historians and archaeologists characterize what constitutes a city based on 8 traits that was espoused by Gordon Child's paper, The Urban Revolution, in order to define what the word city or urban society means by means of well-defined characteristics.